Rush was kind of a national pride, I guess, for a lot of Canadians, you know.
They're as good as Yes ever were, they're as good as Genesis ever were, Pink Floyd, you can put them up against all those, you know, brilliant sort of arty bands of the day.
They know their stuff. They're just a darn good band. They do what they do very well.
The songs are so technical that there's so much there that every time you listen to it, you can actually learn something, you know, as a musician.
The sound is specifically them, nobody else sounds like them.
They're probably to this day still one of the greatest live bands of all time.
When you think Canadian bands, I think you think of a handful of bands, and certainly, if not at the top of the list, then vying for the top slot is Rush, Canada's power trio.
They were a musicians' band. Musicians who go to see bands or listen to bands could really appreciate the talent of these guys.
They were a band that were pushing the limits technically as a band. I mean, as a three-piece band even, they were just unbelievable musicians. They were writing great songs, but they were also saying, hey guys, you know, this is the new standard for what it means to be in a band at this time. You gotta be able to play like this.
Back then, there were very few groups that only had 3 members that could put out a sound like that. And the first one that I remembered was Emerson, Lake and Palmer and their brand of progressive rock. But when Rush came along, they somehow massaged it, reinvented it into something else.
Rush is a very good debut album. Obviously the best was still to come, but I mean, as a first album, it was really good. It had some of their more rock songs.
They released their debut and Buddy Holly cover on Moon Records on their own label, you know, and the whole idea of doing the cover, I guess, was to try and, you know, get some sort of major label interest. Live-wise, they were getting quite a following. They managed to do New York Dolls, I think, through Canada, and then went ZZ Top into America. So, you know, they were starting to get noticed with their live stuff.
It was the only album that didn't have Neil Peart on drums. The original drummer was a man named John Rutsey, who decided after the debut album, it just wasn't what he was looking for. He really didn't like the touring. And the band, of course, at that time was playing every small town in Canada they possibly could play to pay for recording possibly the next album, which wouldn't include him because before that he had quit.
The fact that John Rutsey drummed instead of Neil Peart, who joined thereafter, it kind of gives it a charm and a point of interest from the sake of, you know, this was just a basement band that came out of the basement and caught the world by storm.
Okay, it certainly sounded like Led Zeppelin. I mean, it was certainly, there's a song on there, Finding My Way, that I think kind of sums a lot of it up, actually, because they weren't quite there yet. They did a very convincing Led Zeppelin, but it sounded a lot more like Led Zeppelin than it ever did the Rush that came after that.
they were unsure of their direction. They weren't sure where they wanted to go. They were being influenced by the likes of Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, but they needed to find their own form.
If you go track by track, the first Rush record had just great rock and roll songs, a couple of ballads too, but there's two songs in that first Rush record that still matter a lot today to listeners of radio in Canada, Working Man and In the Mood. They're staples of rock radio, and they're from that very first Rush record in 1974.
When they launched into Working Man with that guitar riff, nobody in this country was quite doing that. And it just had that raw energy that just reached down and grabbed you where it counted, and then it went off and into so many different ways, but it was still basically a three-piece rock group without being too progressive, but just the way it all came together with the right amount of angst. I'm a working man, damn it, you know, that kind of thing.
Songs like that, they put them in the category of really heavy rock music. It was, it was aggressive, really.
There's a very different kind of Rush. But I think it's a good debut because it just displayed potential in the band.
You can see the early albums, the very strong influences from other acts, and as they progress with their songwriting, that disappears and their own style really takes over.
In 1975 came the second album from Rush, Fly By Night, and it was an improvement on the first record. The first reason being the arrival of Neil Peart, replacing John Rutsey.
Rush really wasn't even formed until the second record. When Neil came on board, this guy was a machine.
His technical ability is absolutely top-notch. There's just nobody that can touch him. The things that guy can do behind a drum kit. He has a degree in percussion.
A lot of people say too flashy. I remember listening to him thinking, well, God, anytime there's a little place that he could stick something, he'll stick a splash or he'll stick a little roll. But he is the drummer's drummer. And the only reason he is so good because he has never stopped educating himself.
He's one of that generation of drummers who had most definitely tried to develop their musical and technical abilities instead of just being what I call hod-carrying drummers. They're somebody who took in musical ideas from all sorts of different forms of music, listening to different forms of music, and practiced and produced, a better technique, a better musical ability, a better understanding of rhythm.
You couldn't say he's a rock drummer or a jazz drummer or a blues drummer. He's everything.
He had the largest kit that I'd ever seen with everything. If it could be played, he would put it in and he would play it. Now, there's a danger there to think like, well, yeah, you don't want someone slavering all over a track constantly because it's just, does your head in. You want it to move forward. But he would push it, he would pull it, he would just take the track wherever it needed to go.
One thing that Neil was able to do was when they were playing more complex time signatures, he didn't make it sound hard. He made it sound like it was a bit of a groove. And you don't think, the drummer is now playing a very complex rhythm pattern here. He just played it and moved on to the next section.
Beyond the arrival of Neil Peart as the new drummer in Rush on that second record in '75, Fly By Night, came Neil Peart, the lyricist for Rush. Lyrics had been very kind of remedial and, hey baby, it's 7:45, I feel I'm in the mood on the first record, to some of the incredible eccentric lyrics that were contained on a track like Bytor and the Snow Dog.
Alex Lifeson, the guitarist, and Geddy Lee, the bass player, were the main driving force of the first album. And all of a sudden, along comes a guy who's got a lot more input.
Geddy and Neil as lyricists. Now, in the early days, they wrote lyrics together. But over time, it was Alex and Geddy, of course, that concentrated on the music, and Neil was sort of the lyricist. And you know, he's an avid reader. He reads everything from, you know, biopic sort of books to, you know, the science fiction stuff that Ayn Rand was writing and all that kind of thing. From a songwriting standpoint, I think Neil is part poet, part prose writer, and a little bit of maybe a philosopher in there somewhere.
He's a scholar of literature, history, geography. He's a very smart man. He'd be the kind of guy you'd love to have a conversation with. He'd be the kind of guy you wish was your professor in school if you were a fan, or also because he is just so intelligent.
It definitely seems very cerebral as a little bit being a little bit older and listening back to it. So the lyrics I don't really latch onto as much as, you know, when you're like 13 and you're like, you know, just singing along with some of the songs, and you listen, but you didn't really ever know what those lyrics meant or what they were talking about. Now it kind of seems a little bit like, you know, clever for clever's sake.
I don't even understand them half the time. I don't understand what they're saying, but it makes me feel smart to listen to it.
I didn't really listen to Rush for their lyrics. It was more about their music. I couldn't really even tell you what they were singing about.
Rush became very interesting on the second record in terms of epic proportions. By Tour and the Snow Dog, 8.5-minute song with 4 distinct parts. Incredible. They were branching out and becoming lyrically incredibly adventurous.
In concert, when they launched in to By Tour and the Snow Dog, you know, you could just feel the tension in the air because you knew, you know, the big war between the By Tour and the Snow Dog was coming up and the light show, and it just went on.
Things weren't just songs, or of course they were songs, but they were also moving into areas where they could have large instrumental sections followed by a song, followed by another instrumental sections. And they were also getting into this sort of area of storytelling, which is a typical Rush song. Lots of their songs are stories, some of them like sci-fi type of stories, and some of them just essentially what was happening around them as socially as a band.
Anthem, that was the cool track. That was the one I really liked. It was just, you know, they were, you know, really showing off their chops.
It's kind of a favorite. It was the lead-off track. You put the needle down on side one, you got Anthem, and it quickly took hold.
Sits very well in the album as part of the whole thematical dynamic of the album, but it also sits as well as its own track to one side.
It definitely it seems a little bit to be kind of like along the Led Zeppelin vein, was when they were trying to sound a little bit more Zeppelinish and not so much like themselves. I think Geddy was like adding the growl into his voice, which I actually liked when he started to take that out, you know, make his voice a little bit smoother, you know, as opposed to, it just seemed to be like they were trying to sound a little more rockin' than they were.
Anthem wasn't the highlight, and it wasn't an anthem type of song, except for the title, but definitely one of the better songs from the album, but not necessarily the most successful or the best song from the album.
But when it comes to longevity, the title track, Fly By Night, is a song that you'll hear every day on your favorite classic rock radio station in North America.
Every kid who had bought a guitar at that time, you know, I heard Fly By Night, and it was an easy little lick to kind of learn.
Fly By Night, from a radio standpoint, got the bulk of the airplay. In concert, By Tour and the Snow Dog. Anthem, yeah, very valuable for the record itself, set up the tone, sort of what the theme was going to be. But I think in terms of general acceptance and representative of the band and the album at the time, for radio friendly, it had to be Fly By Night.
They'd got confidence as a band, and they were beginning to experiment in the studio with their own musical ideas, because they're all very proficient musicians, and more than proficient musicians, and they were beginning to allow their musical abilities to be introduced into their compositions.
The thing about the whole band is each person can individually stand up against each other, kind of thing, in terms of writing and playing. And so the album in general was far superior to the one before because of one person, which shows how one person can make such a big difference.
I mean, it was a big stylistic change. When you add a guy like Neil Peart to the band, who is not only an accomplished drummer, even back then, I mean, he was pulling some stuff out of his bag of tricks that a lot of people could do, but maybe wouldn't necessarily put it on record. And with the way he writes lyrics, they definitely became a different sort of a group.
That album, Fly By Night, is much more, you know, it's got a lot more the power chords, but at the same time doesn't have the kind of like Rush kick that trio can produce. You know, when they're all just completely going for it in their own completely separate way that just complements each other.
Caress of Steel, it was the album everybody loved to hate.
Critics and fans thought the album was just too way out there. We talked about the concept phase of which Rush would get into, and I think maybe it was just too bizarre for some fans who discovered them in the first two albums.
It really seemed like they took the whole idea of these marathon type songs where they had like 15 parts and it was 25 minutes long. It really seemed like they had started to experiment with that a lot more on Caress of Steel, and it lost some people. It was a bit hard to get your head around.
Two long suites on it. You had the Necromancer on one side, and then the Fountain of Lamneth on the other, with all these little, you know, sub-songs. Very well crafted. You got this 2-minute drum solo, Didax and Narpets, that came from out of nowhere. But when you rearrange the letters around, you know, addicts and parents and all this kind of stuff.
Caress is from a perspective, from a writing perspective, I think it's more complex. The complexity of what Rush are as musicians and as performers are coming through. You know, each element of Rush, 3 elements of Rush, the guitar, the bass, and the drums, were always intended to be strong. And once Neil Peart had such a magnificent, flamboyant style, massively percussive and stuff. And I think the 3 individual elements were coming together much stronger in Caress.
One track in it called The Necromancer, which is a set of different pieces of music, and it starts with a sort of slightly electric Ladyland sound to it. So obviously in the studio they've been able to use the studio techniques that were available to them. They're a 3-piece, and personally, if it had been me, I would have been a bit scared perhaps to use the studio techniques, because I don't know if you could have taken it out live. But all credit where it's due, they seem to be able to go out live and perform some of these recordings from the studio and make it work live.
Silence shrouds the forest as the birds announce the dawn. 3 travelers ford the river and southward journey on.
They, I think at the time, were really experimenting with what they can do lyrically, what they can do musically, and make, I wouldn't want to call it a mini opera, but I think what Rush was trying to do was tell a story, beginning, middle, and end, or at least a resolution. And it just manifested itself in very moody pieces, especially the Necromancer. You know, when they launch into that in that slow, swingy, almost jazz kind of a feel.
In terms of power chords, power chord rock and roll, Rush are second to none, and you find that out very quickly when you drop the needle on the very first song on Caress of Steel. Bastille Day just lurches out of the speakers at you and does not let up for 4.5 minutes.
It's Bastille Day, and it, you know, bum, bum, bum. That's aggression. Hey, we're pissed, and we're going to do something about it.
Musically, it modulates twice before it gets into the main song, and this is typical of Rush. You know, they'll start with a riff, and then they'll immediately, after about maybe 8 bars, move to a different key and a different riff, and then maybe to another one before the song settles down.
There's a real sense of musicianship going on here. It's almost operatic in its feel. It's a huge track, but what Rush always had and could always manage in something of that size, the grandeur of something like that, is to maintain the aspect of Rush within that.
Bastille Day is led by Alex Lifeson on guitar. He really steered that song. Geddy Lee's vocals very powerful, and Neil Peart's tight drumming. I think for the first time it really highlighted this great trio and how tight-knit they could really be.
As a piece of music, it moves quite seamlessly from section to section. This is one of the things that Rush were good at. I've never really been able to figure out quite why they were able to do it and make it work. Maybe it's because there was only 3 of them. Maybe the simplicity of the 3 people made the movements from different sections, which were actually juxtaposed sometimes musically against each other, but they would make it a seamless movement. And Bastille Day is one of those tracks.
I personally like the song, but when you hear it on the radio, it's one of the more dated sounding Rush songs, so maybe it didn't work that well.
Caress of Steel definitely marked a progression in the band, but no one quite knew how to accept that album. Very much a conceptualized thing.
Not really a step forward, not a step back, but just not really going anywhere. Still trying to find their own direction. Even the title is not a true Rush title. It sounded too heavy metal, too hard rock, which they were in the beginning, a great rock band, but they were moving on to be something more mystical.
Also, any band that is playing very serious music but can have a song on their album called I Think I'm Going Bold as my vote.
When I heard that song, I actually laughed. I don't know if I've ever laughed at a Rush song before, so hearing that song was a bit of a surprise.
They weren't converting a ton of new fans to the Rush camp, but they were keeping the ones they had from that second record.
A lot of people look back on it and think it wasn't as good an album, that's for sure. Fly By Night may be a stronger record in some ways.
I definitely think it was a look ahead to an album, like a concept album, sort of like a 2112.
2112 for the time was very futuristic. You think of 2001 Space Odyssey when you hear this album. Great concept album. very well thought out. They didn't just go in there, jam for 2 days and said, look what we have. They put a lot of thought into this album, and to a lot of Rush fans, their absolute favorite album of all time.
When those sound effects started on side one, you knew something cool was going to happen. And nobody was doing anything quite like that at the time. Sure, there was Genesis. There was Emerson, Lake and Palmer. There was King Crimson, Gentle Giant, you know, insert progressive rock band here. But they didn't quite go the same way that Rush did.
When you got stoned and you put that record on, there was just so many cool sounds going on. You had to keep listening to it over and over again. Every teenage boy wrote 2112 on the back of his jean jacket in the 70s.
Musically, 2112 is just phenomenal. I think it's everywhere Rush was going, culminated on here, and you know, all that experimentation before and how far they could push boundaries came together in 2112, and it just made everybody go, whoa, what is that? You know, because, I mean, there'd been concepts before and stuff, but again, their superb musicianship carried through, you know, they are just incredible musicians as individuals.
They try and keep on the 4/4 timing thing because that's the most easiest kind of rhythm to listen to. But then in the middle of a song, they'll break into a completely different time signature and then bring it back. And by doing that and the skill of each musician, it shows that, you know, well, that's basically how you write a great long song.
They must have wanted that respect, you know, egotistically, maybe even subconsciously, as musicians. And I think with Rush, like a lot of bands, the musicianship comes first, you know, and it shows in their construction. They don't construct to go like, oh, I'll tell you what, I'll do a really clever bit here and everybody will think I'm great in there. It wasn't a concept of this. I think they just composed. They composed as they were. That's how I would play that part.
Their ability to play very fast phrases very tightly together as a unit, I think, is them showing off a little bit more. I think putting in bars, unusual bars, is not so much showing off. For instance, if you work with a songwriter who doesn't think about a verse should be 8 bars long, their first verse could be 7 bars long in 4/4, but their next verse could be 11 bars long in 4/4. That's to accommodate the lyrics, the vocals. It's nothing else to do with being clever. It's just the way it works.
The title song, 2112, which is a good 20 minutes long, at those times it wasn't really popular to be writing songs of that length, but they showed that they could do it. But it wasn't like they were writing songs that were of great length that were crap or anything. It was, you know, it was all quality music still. Lyrically as well, it's some stuff in there is very deep and ahead of its time.
Neil Peart, for example, had you know, come to his apex of thematical writing.
It's a 19-minute suite that told the story of hope and how it was dashed, and lifeblood spills over and all that kind of thing. It was a very tumultuous track. They took a big chance on doing something like that, but because no one was doing it at the time, I think it stands even today as one of their best.
The thing about concept albums, a lot of them can be really ethereal and spacey and have a lot more lows than highs. Rush weren't messing around with 2112. This was a rock record. This was a screamer. Sure, it had its passages that, you know, meandered into the soft and eclectic, but it came screaming back into action with more power chords.
Really popular. Everybody remembered that lick. Dang, 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 dang.
The 2112 album was very sophisticated due to the fact that it was Terry Brown, the producer, his very first masterpiece. He really helped shape the band. It was also the album where Neil Peart really was a star lyrically. So while he was working on the lyrics, Geddy and Alex could then just really work on the music, and that's how they did things. Neil would do the lyrics, they would do the music, then they put them together. But it was Terry Brown who really, I think, helped form the band for this album. And I think he would be, on this album, the fourth member of the band as producer, because it really was his masterpiece as much as it was the rest of the guys.
And you've got to give them a bit of credit for being able to say, okay, well, we want to move in this direction now, and not be scared. And of course, what happened was that the fans, it was reflected in the fans by the buying of the album. It opened them up to a much bigger market, especially in North America as well.
It was just a moment, just a landmark moment for the band. And, you know, their fan base just went woof. Just all of a sudden everybody was talking about the album, you know.
They were being led by themselves, no longer influenced by other bands, only influenced by themselves.
And of course, the first side is all passages of concept. The second side is just a bunch of great rock songs.
I still like to go back and visit that album. I still enjoy it, but I think it does. A lot of the early Rush certainly sounds dated. It was produced technically great at the time, but things have progressed so much that it tends to lock itself in a little capsule. So I don't know that it stands the test of time that well. It's fun to go back and listen to, but it doesn't stand the test of time like, say, a Led Zeppelin 4, where it sounds like it was just done yesterday.
I think the album still sounds great because it was so. Because no one was really doing it back then, and it's great musicianship, and no matter how many years you look at, great musicianship and great players always stand the test of time. If you look at Jimi Hendrix, he's still always looked upon as a guitar god, and because of Rush's skill as a band, that's why the album is still so cool.
Geddy Lee is just amazing. Here you had this front man who, you know, bass player, playing keys, singing these, you know, intricate vocal lines over these intricate bass lines. It was just amazing to watch this guy.
Geddy Lee, vocals-wise, you know, as much as in his bass playing, it's just incredible. I mean, he started very early days. He had, you know, much higher falsetto voice, which he still maintains, I'm sure, even to this day. Yeah, and brought it down somewhat. But just what a range, the guy's range, and it's flawless.
Geddy is a good vocalist for Rush. I don't think you'd want to see him, you know, with an orchestra singing Andrea Bocelli songs, and I don't think you want to see him, you know, doing the Michael Bolton thing either. I think Geddy has the perfect range, the perfect vocal style for what Rush does. Put any other singer in Rush, I don't think it would work.
I always really liked his voice. You know, I know people that hated his voice, but I always really liked it. I especially would like it. I loved it when he would sing, and sing kind of like the whole song in one octave, and then like the last chorus of it would just take it up an octave and just like hit this note that was just like, wah, you know, like just like way up there.
I liked it when he was singing up high and just really, you know, really aggressive and just wailing that, you know, peeling the paint off the walls kind of shit he was doing. It was amazing.
Geddy Lee, as a vocalist, reminds me of a couple of vocalists. He reminds me of Robert Plant, and he reminds me of John Anderson. although he does remind me of these people, certainly in his earlier days, he's very distinctive, you know, and that is the most important thing, I think, in a singer, is to have a distinctive voice more than a technical voice.
He's not the best looking guy in the world. He's kind of got those big round kind of John Lennon glasses and this, you know, scraggly old hair, and he's never really changed. A really thin looking guy with a nose the size of a small car. He's not the pretty boy that you'd have on a poster on your wall, but he sounded mystical, and I think his voice had that mystical quality, which started out the Rush concept albums and everything that they did with the Trees and 2112 and Farewell to the Kings. You needed that kind of high-end, high vocal voice that caught your attention.
One of the reasons why he didn't get the respect that he deserved was maybe because his voice was just way too high, you know, and maybe didn't appeal to people. Also, I think the fact that maybe he didn't write his own lyrics, write the lyrics that he sang.
For people who are singers but don't write the lyrics, that can be extremely difficult. But he has a way of doing it, it sounds as if he's written the lyrics, and he's not just, you know, reading the lyrics and doesn't understand what the song's about. He gives you the impression he really knows what he's talking about.
It's just the way that he'll be playing bass lines which are so melodically different from the vocal lines that he's singing.
It makes it all look easy, exactly like his bass playing.
He's not your like slap kind of bass. He's not just your driving rhythm. He's filling those places when Alex is doing his thing and Neil is doing his thing, and there's a place to be filled, he can fill them, or Neil can, or Alex can. He's almost like the second guitarist. If they had 4 members and there was a rhythm guitarist, he's almost like a rhythm guitar player.
He has the technical ability to play fast and complex things, and he also understands what a bass guitar is, which is it's to hold down the bottom end of a chord. So he has those 2 attributes. So when he's singing and playing, he's doing what a bass player should be doing, which is holding it down. And when there is a moment that all the band, drums, guitar and bass, play a technical thing, he's got the great ability to do that as well.
He had a very driving sound, Rickenbacker, a very long neck, thin body, but very deep tonal sound with a high end. So it's a very specific sound bass-wise. And he used that impact sound, so he used that punch. The bass had that punch and that drive, so it leapt out at you. It didn't say, it wasn't warm and rounded at the bottom end and just rumbled along, which would have been nice with interesting phrasings. But here was something that leapt out. It was as dynamic as the guitar sound.
Alex Lifeson is, I think, an extremely underrated guitar player. If you grew up as a kid listening to rock, you know, in the 80s, you know, Geddy Lee's the best, you know, and Neil Peart's the best drummer, but Alex Lifeson nobody really talked about. But if you try to play his stuff, he's extremely talented, jazz trained and very technical, great classical guitar player, and knowing on a personal basis, trying to sit down and actually learn his stuff was very hard. He didn't just actually play like the power chords, you know, he would actually play like 7th chords or just odd chords with distortion.
The riffs he comes up with and the stuff he plays, he's taking simple stuff but making it a lot more complex, but it's not affecting the sound. It never, like the riffs that he writes, it's not just being clever for clever sake kind of thing. It's got a lot of depth and stuff. The riff to Limelight is this kind of... Yeah, he's playing that. It's just this... It's these runs that he puts in between the chords which makes it so cool. And rather than just saying, right, okay, here's 3 chords and I'm going to string them together, he's making it as intricate as he can.
He gets a good sound. He's also able to, with his touch, be very tender with his sound, and then in the next phrase be really hard and rocking.
The solos were just so abstract. That's the only word I can think of to describe them, because they were just oddball, you know, the whammy bar and, you know, the way he would use the effects, like he'd put a chorus on there and really kind of just get these crazy fucking sounds that were sort of reminiscent of Hendrix, but you know, he took it to a whole new level. It was just strange.
It's not just about get to the break where the solo is and play the solo, or just play the riff that everybody knows and then play a solo. I mean, this guy, you know, from the most delicate phrasings to the most complex phrasings, you know. Again, I just think his style and his approach to the instrument was so incredibly complex and powerful.
People who are fans of the Eddie Van Halen or Joe Satriani's or even the Slash from Guns N' Roses might not necessarily be a fan of Alex Lifeson, but he is definitely one of the best guitarists in the world.
In the 1970s, he had long hair and looked more Spinal Tap than anyone. However, when he really came into his own in the latter part of the 70s and the 80s in terms of, an image of a rock star, here's this sort of relatively clean-cut guy. He didn't look like Jimmy Page, he didn't look like Clapton, he didn't look like the typical guitar hero, but close your eyes, he had all the licks.
I really like Alex Lifeson. I don't know that I would consider him a Jimmy Page or a Jeff Beck or anything like that. But again, I think what really works for Rush is whether the individual is a stand-up musician or not, together what they create is really what it's all about. It's all about the chemistry.
2112 was their first million-selling record, and that's always good for a band to have success, commercial success. It brings all sorts of things to the band. It brings confidence, obviously brings money, it brings them being able to fulfill what they want to do musically and commercially. But the band also were very prolific during this period. So I think when you're being very prolific, to get the feedback like that is a great thing to have.
2112 was their landmark album, in a way that it exposed them to more audience. Farewell to Kings following that was a massively successful album for them.
And wouldn't necessarily be better than 2112, but what it did do was showcase their musical abilities. They're listening to 2112 and then listening to this album, you can tell that they became a lot better musicians individually, but more so as a trio. It really highlighted them playing really close-knit, really knowing, probably starting to really learn to where each other was going, where they knew. They didn't have to look, they just knew what the other person was going to be doing next.
When they turn the pages of history, when these days have passed long ago, will they read of us with sadness, or the seeds that we let grow? We turned our gaze from the castles in the distance, eyes cast down on the path of least resistance.
It's different because it's not conceptual like they were going before Caress and 2112 that we've talked about. So it was different.
They were still doing, Cygnus X1 and Xanadu, the longer pieces, but the other songs were becoming a little more, I wouldn't want to say top 40, but definitely a little more radio friendly. A song like Closer to the Heart, much shorter than the 11-minute Xanadu and the 9-minute, whatever else here. So I think it just showed them maturing and trying different aspects of their writing and maybe working within time frames.
Closer to the Heart for Rush had to be, that's an anthem if there ever was one. So that's probably their calling card song. It still gets played on the radio all the time today. That is probably the most successful song that they've ever had, as far as when they do the live shows, the lighters still come out. People still love to hear that song.
I can't help but think of the video for that song right away, which is kind of funny because they've got the sort of oval around Geddy's eyes for the lead off to the video with the now legendary intro to that song.
And the men who hold high places must be the ones who start to mold a new reality closer to the heart, closer to the heart.
Closer to the Heart blew me away. When I heard that, that was like my favorite song for however many months. And I learned that, I was so anxious to actually learn that riff, you know. I thought that was the coolest thing when I actually learned that. I was, you know, it's one of those things that to me was like kind of a Stairway to Heaven riff.
Philosophers and plowmen, each must know his part to sow a new mentality closer to the heart. Yes, closer to the heart. Yeah.
Closer to the Heart starts with a 12-string acoustic, and then they seem to manage to suddenly, you know, completely change the sound and go into this sort of radio-friendly rock sound, which is typical of Rush.
When Geddy comes in, you know, and starts with his little plea, and the men who hold high places must be the ones to start. He was saying it was almost a wish, but it was almost, here's what is likely that needed to happen. And I think it's something everyone can relate to. You can break that down and look at it, I believe, from many different ways. And whether you're, you know, angry at a politician or whatever, it fits. It all starts from the top.
From the intro, there's a very sweet, soft impact on the intro, the percussive bells that Neil Peart goes on. I mean, there's not one moment that the dynamic of the song isn't altered.
It had just this really nice groove to it, you know, that it just finds like a really nice groove, and it was kind of a simple song, but just really kind of powerful.
Rush had written ballads before 1977, but somehow Closer to the Heart was the ballad for Rush to that point in their career. It had everything. Song structure was perfection. Lyrics, perfection. It just seemed to matter to everyone who listened to it.
You couldn't go far wrong as taking a track like that, which fundamentally it could be classed as like a sort of girly track, you know, Closer to the Heart, a bit soft lyric, but just listen to the musicianship and the composition. I mean, learn that and you won't go far wrong.
It was different. It was kind of unexpected. It was like they took a step back and got a new perspective on the world, or it seemed to me, musically. And then Xanadu, the second track, this 10-minute masterpiece in terms of production. Really interesting song.
Xanadu goes off into this slightly sci-fi sort of typical Rush rock, you know, suddenly it's an explosion of rock music. That's one thing that they weren't scared to do, which I think is great. You know, a track could start very gently and they would sort of superimpose this sort of, you know, big rock element over the top of it.
Some songs don't have to be 18 minutes. They don't have to be 9 minutes long. Closer to the Heart was the perfect length, you know, tracking, what, just under 3 minutes, I believe it was. Something that had to be set up, tell a story, create a mood, Xanadu, yeah, it probably had to be 11 minutes long. Rush makes music for themselves.
Whether Rush are playing a song that, in their opinion, is a more commercial and simpler song, or whether Rush are playing a large, complex piece of music, they're never scared to take those sort of risks. In the middle of one of their more commercial songs, they might have something that another artist just, well, you can't put that in there, but they say, yes, we're going to put that in there and we'll make it work, and they would make it work.
It's a great album, and it got out to even more people. But it was only the alteration of the direction, really. You know, Neil Peart not doing the whole sci-fi epic novel type thing. So I suppose, you know, if you wanted to just listen to individual tracks, it's better because it has that, you know.
Break my fast